I've been thinking about this presentation for some weeks and asking myself, what can I say to you as strategists that will be of real value? For the last 12 years, I've been working with the largest team of demographic experts in Australia. Their work and their passion is to understand how demographic change will affect every part of Australia, the nation, each state, region and city, every suburb, neighbourhood and city block. We call this their knowledge of place. My job is to use their knowledge of place to answer our clients' strategic questions, like Richmond Football Club, who wanted to double its membership in 5 years in a highly competitive landscape. So the concept I can offer you is that knowledge of place can convey a powerful strategic advantage. And in sharing Richmond's story, here are a couple of other ideas to kick us off and that we'll revisit throughout this presentation. The first is that strategic direction can be informed by observing broad demographic trends. And the second is that successful implementation of that strategy will be determined by understanding local nuances. So, you're the strategist, I'm the demographer, and strategists often employ demographers to tell them about the broad trends occurring in society. They're interested in the opportunities and threats that these pose for their businesses. And any demographer worth their salt can tell you that Australia is in the midst of a population boom, the likes of which has not been seen since the gold rush. 2006 was a watershed year when long-held demographic patterns and cycles changed, seemingly overnight. Demographically, there is a new reality which has important implications for all businesses. These changes are being driven by both economic and social events, and they are reshaping our society. On the economic side, there's been a step change in levels of overseas migration to Australia, driven by good economic times. The pre-2006 reality has migration adding, on average, 100,000 people to the population every year. The post-2006 reality has migration adding, on average, 200,000 people every year. That's double the old reality. And despite the end of the mining boom, we are unlikely to return to pre-2006 averages. However, the end of the mining boom is leading to a redistribution of growth back to Sydney and Melbourne. And after decades of playing second fiddle, Melbourne is seriously challenging Sydney for the dominant position. On the social side, Australia is in the midst of a baby boom, the like of which has not been seen since the post-World War II boom. And think what a massive impact that boom had on every aspect of society. We're still feeling it today. Since 2006, there have been 50,000 more children born in Australia every year than long-term averages. That's the orange bars. That's a massive change. Here we are cruising along for 30 years, adding the same number of children to the population, and then bang, up it jumps by 50,000 every year. The first of these kids were primary school age in 2011, and they will start high school this year. And by 2026, there will be 705,000 more children in our schools than there are today. Think how many new schools that translates into. Several years ago, we presented this growth scenario to our clients, the Catholic Education Office. They're responsible for all Catholic schools across Victoria. The first thing they did was ask us to check our numbers, and once they were convinced they were correct, they had to completely rethink their business as usual strategy and start planning for new schools and acquiring land. The state system is yet to catch up, and Jeff Kennett may well rue the day he closed 220 schools in Victoria based on a trend rather than recognising the low point in a cycle. The combination of these economic and social drivers means that the dominant population group, the ageing baby boomers, has now been caught up by two other groups. There are three growth segments to focus on: retirees, home builders, driven by migration, and children, driven by the baby boom. This is good news for Australia. It means growth, it means opportunity. And often strategists think that this is all the demographic information they need to get started on their strategic work. And I often talk in a lot more detail about these changes, but that's not the purpose of this presentation. Instead, I want to make the point that understanding broad demographic change helps you answer 3 important strategic questions. Who should I provide my products and services to? What services should I focus my efforts on? And how will I build a business to take advantage of the changes afoot? For our client Stockland, the property developer, it means diversifying from building housing estates on the urban fringe to adding retirement villages and medium density housing to their product mix. Answering these 3 questions helps you set your strategic direction. But the success of these strategies will be determined by answering 2 more questions. Where should I locate my business activity? And when is the best time to enter and exit a location? Where should Stockland put each of its new retirement villages? And when should it build them? Location and timing matter to strategic success. This piece of the strategic puzzle is referred to by Harvard Business School professor Juan Alcacer as the strategy of place. And in his words, many companies don't understand that what works in one location may not work somewhere else. Geo-mistakes sap energy out of an organization and cause it to lose focus on what it was doing well in the first place, especially when it means siphoning time and attention away from an existing successful business. You must take a long-term, strategic view of location decisions. Our client, a large retailer, places strategic importance on being first to market in new residential growth areas. If they build too late, they lose their first mover advantage. If they build too early and there's not enough population to support their store, it can cost them upwards of $500,000 every year. Timing is critical to strategic success. So what makes location decisions so tricky? After all, most organizations provide their products and services to people from a place. Schools, for example, provide education to children from schools in suburbs. The problem is that places respond to demographic trends differently. Remember those 705,000 additional school children? Despite the huge growth in school-age children nationally, not all parts of Australia, not all suburbs will be affected by the baby boom in the same way. Some suburbs will actually experience a decline in this age group. Knowing where and when to respond requires a detailed knowledge of place. So how can you feel confident that you're investing in the right place at the right time? Luckily, there are demographers who study how broad demographic trends will play out in each suburb, neighbourhood or community. And we prepared a video which you can find on our YouTube channel that summarises this idea. We'll play a piece of it now, and when it's finished, we'll look at how all of this relates to football. How can you be sure you're investing in the right place at the right time? By predicting human behaviour. People follow patterns. In the morning, Bob will wake up, get dressed, eat breakfast, and go to work. On a bigger scale, we see patterns in the way people move through stages of life and the impact this movement has on cities, towns, and suburbs. Young single people tend to move close together around the city centre and behave in similar ways. Young families tend to move to the suburbs where they can afford a house with a backyard for their kids, who will then go to kindergarten, primary school, then high school. And when these kids grow up and eventually move out, the suburb is left with a population majority of empty nesters, who might move on to a smaller house for a more relaxed lifestyle. And as they're replaced by a new young couple, the cycle continues. So how can understanding these patterns help your business? They can be used to predict future scenarios. Like, in 2 years' time, which suburb will have the highest concentration of kids aged between 6 and 10? Or, what's the fastest growing area for young single people? And how long will that last? With this knowledge, you can make smarter decisions for your business. There's a bit more to that video, but I hope that gave you an insight into the knowledge of place that demographers can bring to those tricky where and when questions. So now that we've set the scene, here's where we applied our knowledge of place to give Richmond Football Club a strategic locational advantage. Football in Australia is not a typical sporting market. It's not like in the USA, where each elite team owns the fan base in an entire state. In Victoria, there are 10 clubs in one state, all competing for fans. This is a strategic challenge for the AFL. How do they encourage clubs to grow the total membership pie rather than taking fans from each other? It's a strategic challenge for each club. They have to decide where to build their fan base in this highly competitive landscape. Do they focus on areas where support for the AFL and their club is strong? Or do they look for areas where AFL is not strongly supported and build a new fan base, a longer-term strategy? In the last 5 years, Richmond has been the most successful club in the AFL at building membership. How did they do it? Well, we need to go back to 2008 to a decision made by the previous management team. Richmond's home ground at Punt Road was not available for training during the cricket season, and the club was looking for an out-of-season training ground. The location of alternate training grounds is an important strategic decision for a club. It's an opportunity to engage with people in a new location. The management team selected Craigieburn in Melbourne's northern growth corridor. They hope to tap into the rapidly growing population and a brand new facility provided by the council and property developers. So a bit about Craigieburn. Craigieburn is on Melbourne's northern fringe, 35 kilometres from the CBD. It sits in the centre of a fast-growing residential area. Forecasts show it will grow by 78,000 people by 2031. Sizable growth and very attractive to those looking to grow with it. Many of the new residents will be young families with children, kids the right age to make their allegiance to a football club. And they were in the right socio-demographic bracket to be able to afford club membership. It all looked very good. But fast forward several years and this decision was not bearing fruit. People in Craigieburn were not supporting the Tigers. It looked like it was going to be a long, slow burn to build a fan base there. And it was disheartening and expensive to take a full elite football team out to training 6 times a year and only 300 people turned up to watch. In 2010, a new progressive management team started at Richmond, headed by CEO Brendan Gale with Kane Little as his general manager of consumer business. They set an aggressive growth strategy to double their membership in 5 years. They decided to revisit the Craigieburn decision, but if they were going to convince their board and the AFL to support a new strategic direction, they needed a strong evidence base to support any change. So they started by mapping members by suburb across Melbourne. Mapping your data is powerful. Straight away you can see a strong spatial pattern of membership in the east and southeast. The gap you can see here around Dandenong can be explained by the large numbers of migrants from non-English speaking backgrounds. And you can see that despite all the effort, very little inroads had been made into Craigieburn. So now they have a map showing where current supporters live, but it doesn't tell them where to build their future fan base. Football is generational. You tend to support the team your parents supported. Low-hanging fruit are the children of past and current members. So the question is, where are they? Kane had been to a talk by demographer Bernard Salt and realised that demographics may be able to answer his question. He wanted to work with a firm who could take the broad demographic trends Bernard talked about and apply them to their business and local market. We started working with the club in 2011. we were immediately struck by the Craigieburn decision. Why would Richmond, a club with a long history in the inner southeast, go north? To a demographer, it was clear why Richmond was struggling to gain traction there. But we could see that unless you had demographic expertise, it would be an easy mistake to make. The Northern Growth Corridor is one of the fastest growing parts of the city, and it was full of young families. So why wasn't it working? Well, each of us makes individual decisions about where we will live at different times in our lives. As students, when we start a family, when we retire. This feels personal, but as the video showed, collectively it makes predictable and measurable patterns. These patterns are shown clearly in this map of where people went when they changed their address. And what an incredibly strong pattern it is. Demographers get very excited about this kind of thing. You can see the strong northwest, that's the green arrows, and southeast divide in Melbourne. People who live in the southeast do not tend to go north or west when they move house. Richmond's traditional fan base is in the inner southeast, and as each generation of Richmond fans grows up and starts their own families, they are most likely to look for a house they can afford on the same side of the city as they grew up. Demographers call this outward sectoral migration, and here you can clearly see people who live in Richmond strongholds fanning out across the east and southeastern suburbs. And the next stop on this outward journey was Cardinia. So a bit about Cardinia. Cardinia is on Melbourne's southeast fringe, 55 kilometres from the CBD. The main town is Pakenham. It is a fast-growing residential area. Forecasts show it will grow by 80,000 people by 2036. Many of the residents will be young families with children, the right age to make their allegiance to a football team. And they were in the right socio-demographic bracket to be able to afford club membership. It all sounds very good. It all sounds very familiar. It all sounds a lot like Craigieburn. So what's different? Well, there are three important differences. First, there was low-hanging fruit. People in Cardinia like AFL. It ranks in the top 3 areas for AFL participation, whereas Craigieburn featured in the bottom 3. Added to that, people in Cardinia already like Richmond. Existing residents of Cardinia support Richmond at a higher rate than other teams in the AFL. This indicated that fan engagement would provide a fast return on investment. Secondly, there was a generational advantage. Migration data confirmed that Cardinia was gaining its new population from areas where Richmond already had a strong following. These are the children of past and current supporters, setting up their own homes and bringing up the next generation of potential fans. This bodes well for the future. And third, Cardinia does not gain its population from new migrants to Australia, who would take longer to bring into the footy fold. We knew from previous work with the AFL that areas where many families come from non-English speaking backgrounds have the lowest membership rates. In Cardinia, only 7% of the population came from non-English speaking countries, and this compares to 24% across Melbourne and 27% in Craigieburn. Richmond does have a longer-term strategy involving new migrants, but that's another story. So the evidence was clear and compelling. The biggest future opportunity to attract fans and revenue were in and around Cardinia. But with the lessons from Craigieburn still fresh, the Richmond board needed to be convinced of any changes in direction. Having the evidence presented by people who could view their business through a demographic lens gave them the confidence to proceed. They could see how patterns in the way people live in different parts of the city clearly explained the patterns they were seeing in their own data. And it gave them the missing part of the story and explained what had gone wrong in Craigieburn. The hardest thing was convincing the players, actually, to make a 50-kilometre journey on a bus to go to training. Next, the evidence ensured that the AFL supported re-engineering the boundaries for compulsory player clinics and school visits so that Richmond focused on the southeast growth suburbs. Richmond also needed the Shire of Cardinia to partner with them, and Kane recalls that when Brendan called the Shire CEO, he had a strong narrative and compelling evidence, so the conversation quickly turned to how they could help each other meet their objectives. For the council, the advantages are clear. Football brings people together and strengthens the community. It can enhance the health and well-being of residents who participate, and it offers families an affordable and fun entertainment option. So how did it go? Well, I guess I gave the punchline away at the beginning. The club broke membership records every year for the last 5 years, growing 9% per annum. In Cardinia, membership has grown 26% per annum since 2012. As a result, membership doubled from 36,000 in 2010 to 72,000 members in 2015. The strategy was hugely successful, and it was an ambitious strategy. Richmond is now the third largest club behind Collingwood and Hawthorn, and that's despite not having final success. Maybe this year. The community is right behind them, and the players are happy. When the team goes out to Cardinia for training, 4,000 people show up to watch, which makes that 50-kilometre bus trip all worthwhile. So I'm not saying for a moment that we were responsible for all of this success, but that by understanding local demographic patterns as they related to their business, Richmond could make an informed and confident location choice and make sure that all their effort was going into the right place. And I think it's important to say that we're all looking for technology and innovation to deliver big wins. Well, Richmond got a 50% upswing from understanding place, where they're located. So in sharing that story, there are 7 ideas I hope will be helpful to you as you formulate and implement your strategies. Knowledge of place can give you a significant competitive advantage. Strategic direction can be informed by observing broad demographic trends. That's the who, what, and how. Oh, here we go. Successful implementation will be determined by understanding local nuances. That's the where and when. Not all growth is the right growth. You need to understand what is driving it. That's Craigieburn versus Cardinia. Change happens in cycles, not trends. Jeff Kennett. Mapping your data with demographic data provides powerful insight. And evidence presented as narrative can convince others to support your strategies. So, as strategists, should you talk to a demographer? Here's what Kane has to say. So a copy of the presentation is available on our website. There's also an ebook detailing the rise of the 3 growth markets I identified at the beginning of this session, and several other ebooks you might be interested in. Thank you for listening. Thanks to Brendan Gale and Kane Little and the Richmond Football Club for letting me tell their story. And go the Tigers in 2016.